So welcome to Rochelle's Book Club Part 2. And the second book that I like to recommend to new people is Rethinking Hypothyroidism by Dr. Antonio Bianco. I hope I'm saying that right. He was the former president of the American Thyroid Association. Is that correct? Yes. And let's read his bio. It says he also and currently is a professor of medicine and a member on the Committee of Molecular Metabolism and Nutrition at the University of Chicago, where he runs a lab funded by NIH. And so this man has had well over 20 plus years of pedigreed dedication to the thyroid hormone world and space. Now, I know there can be a little bit of a bias against sometimes the FDA and NIH and maybe politically involved vehicles that we've recently discovered to be what we call captured agencies by pharmaceutical companies and their profits. So I just wouldn't hold that necessarily against this gentleman, as you hear me say, this is his pedigree and this is where he's worked. Because the book, when you read it, is very common sense. What I like about this book in the beginning is he goes through the history of hypothyroidism to start with. So how was it first ever discovered? He talks about like the soil and some of the sea creatures and iodine and things of that nature that really led to the discovery of how to heal goiters in people who had low iodine based diets. And then that evolves into maybe the 1800s and the later, or early, later 1800s, like 1890s, when desiccated thyroid first came around the block. That, original extract from dried porcine gland, thyroid gland, that was then given to human beings. So he goes through the history of it. So then from time point to time point of, well, how did we ever discover what hypothyroidism was? How did it swing in evolution between diet and resources? Then when pharmaceuticals came around, what happened? And he gives you a really good nighttime read. This one's a little thicker than other books that I've recommended before, so it will take you a little bit longer. But it is written in common sense knowledge and gives you the history play of hypothyroidism, its treatment options, and then its evolution of thought when it comes to the research that has supported one camp versus the other, or pitted the two against each other. And so I like this book for more context behind the scenes that we never knew before. So for example, when I was reading this, you can see my highlighted pages here. Like, I did not know as a practitioner that there are no studies that compare what we call synthetic T4, levothyroxine, or Synthroid, which is more so the standard of care in traditional medicine these days from your primary care endocrinologist, and cytomel or leothyronine, which is also synthetic, meaning synthetic in both cases lab derived and made largely, which is synthetic T3 that is given to clients. Those two medication forms have not had comparative trials in a large, what we call placebo-controlled, meaning there's like a saline population set of group of people to compare against the people who then get the drugs. So there's no placebo-controlled, double-blinded, meaning people who get one drug versus the other don't know what they're getting. Randomized, just as it sounds. So it's again, not selective or biased. Let's see, so placebo-controlled, randomized, double-blinded study or trial that has compared the synthetics, which are the more standard of care today in traditional medical world, to the desiccateds, which this book goes into talking about, that were around before the synthetics came to town. So we don't really have good data, and I just didn't know this. I kind of assumed as a practitioner that, what is new is the latest and greatest, and I have found out since that that's just not true, and this book helps shape some of my evolution of thought on that. Because desiccates were around since the 1890s. Wow, really long time. So guess what? They're not FDA approved. But guess because why? Because there was no FDA essentially at that time. And so Synthroid and Cytomel are FDA approved, but guess what? There was an FDA around and they had to go through proper process because it was a lab derived, pharmaceutical profitable product. So this book is good because it gives you details on that. Then it actually goes into the molecular chemistry of T4 and T3. It goes into the pathophysiology of how thyroid is made in the human body. It goes into some of the physiologics of describing why someone might not make enough T4 or not make enough T3, or they might make enough T4 but not convert it into T3, or they might make enough of both but it doesn't actually get into the cell. He'll talk about all of that too. So I like it because it gives you a very comprehensive overview of hypothyroidism in general. And then he'll talk about combination therapies and his experience in using them. And he will end up leaning towards the end more so on using the synthetics, but in combination form. So using Synthroid, levothyroxine with Cytomel or liothyronine, and he gives providers some examples of how that works and what would be best combination therapy to use. So he doesn't necessarily land on the end result, the desiccated therapy with the porcine gland, the 1890s, been around the block, long-term drugs like Armour, NP thyroid, Nature thyroid that are available, are the best form and choice, but he does really advocate for the client and the patient and their symptoms, and he thinks that there needs to be a bigger conversation surrounding hormone thyroid replacement therapy, or thyroid hormone replacement therapy, excuse me, and that synthetics are just not the be-all end-all per se. So I like that approach. I think it's very common sense. I like the history behind it. It gives you a better understanding of how we ever got here in the first place. And it was very well-rounded in that sense, that opened my eyes to seeing that, yes, I agree, there are some people that will benefit from different pathways than just the Synthroid Cytomel, choices that we have. A lot of insurance companies will approve, but we might need other choices. So Rethinking Hypothyroidism by Dr. Antonio Bianco. Google that one. Will be definitely more than a weekend read, but it's worth it. And if you are somebody who is thinking that you have hypothyroidism, or you struggle with some symptoms in that range, or you've been on, let's say, Synthroid for forever, and you're just kind of curious about what the other options are, this is a good place to kind of start.